Howdy. So this week we are looking at Matthew 11. And in Matthew 11, we see a reference to the idea that God is revealing things to little children. Now, with this, what we have seen is that John the Baptist was in the midst of prison and he was struggling with whether or not Jesus was truly the Messiah. Now, with that, what we're going to understand is the fact that this does not mean that John the Baptist has stopped following after God or that he has ignored everything that's happened before. But oftentimes, when the world is spiraling in ways that we don't understand, it's very easy to lose sight of the feeling of what we can or cannot do in God's kingdom, while at the same time also still being able to say that things are in God's control. You see, a lot of things were happening in that time period that John the Baptist didn't realize. He didn't have the perspective to see them in the midst of his struggle. Now, with all of this, is that Jesus is trying to point out the good news is still being proclaimed and people are still doing good to their neighbor and being able to show the kingdom of God to others. So, even whenever we see the world as not making a lot of sense, things feel like they're spiraling out of control, that doesn't mean that God isn't doing something, and it doesn't mean that God has lost control. It oftentimes means that God is transforming us and our world in ways that we just don't get yet. The thing is that God does a lot of things that are beyond our comprehension, and oftentimes it'll take time for us to look back and realize what he was doing in the meanwhile. So, as Jesus is speaking about all these different parts with in regard to John the Baptist and who they were looking for when he was there, what he's trying to point out is that we're not going to be in control of everything. Not everything is going to follow a pattern that always makes sense to us. But what he's saying is that if we're with him, his yoke is easy and his burden is light. So as we're looking at this passage, what we're going to be able to see is that we're meant to let things go to God. We're meant to go ahead and acknowledge that there are so many things that we'll never be able to affect. And in reality, if we keep trying to control the world around us, it ends up bringing out the worst sides to who we are. So we might have this group saying that they're evil and that group saying that the first group was evil, and everyone's trying to say, well, this is really how the situation is and you're wrong if you don't see things from the way that I look at it. And in reality is that we all have blind spots that we don't realize, and God is trying to do things that are beyond our comprehension. So in this week's gospel, we'll be looking at how it is that we understand God as being in control and treating us not with disrespect by looking at us as little children, but rather by acknowledging that there is a lot that we don't know, and by acknowledging that we're not the ones who are going to be determining how everything goes going forward. So even though we can affect things that are within our lives, we have to leave changing the world in God's hands.